Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast my co-host Jordan Tyra. How are we, Jordan?
I'm good, thank you. Glad to be back as always.
Thank you for coming back on, mate. We have got a very exciting guest this week. It is Jill Zeller. Jill, how are you?
Good. Thank you guys for having me.
No, thank you for coming on, Jill. I know we've got a slightly different podcast today because you're going to be sharing a topic that I'm sure a lot of listeners will be interested in, but I know you've got some really cool stuff to share in terms of how you've applied it as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. But we always start these podcasts in the same way, Jill, and that's on you, your background, what jobs you've been in. So can you give us a little bit of a rundown to start with?
Sure. I'll go current and then work backwards because it's quite lengthy. I'm currently at the University of Georgia as the associate performance coach for women's soccer and women's golf. Prior to this, I was with the San Diego Wave FC in the NWSL, working as a sports performance coach. And prior to that, I was at the University of Southern California, where I had multiple teams, women's soccer being one of them. And actually, that coach moved to Georgia, which is why I'm here. He called me back. And then prior to my West Coast life, I was in a handful of universities, Boston University being the primary. On the East Coast, I also worked with the USA Hockey for two quads as well. In the private sector as well, I started out with Mark Verstegen and Mike Boyle as kind of my two pillars, and then made my way through the collegiate scene. So I've been bouncing around coast to coast and discipline to discipline for probably about the last 12 years.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I suppose it's very different in terms of the setup of university over there as compared to what we've got in the UK, isn't it? So what sort of standard are you looking at in terms of the players you're working with now? I know you've got a number of sports, but in terms of the football.
I mean, we're here to win. We're here to make history, and it's a ish of a new coaching staff. They're on season two, and so just trying to, like you said, implement some different standards and bring people up to speed and be as fit and fast as possible.
Give us a little insight into working with, obviously, Mark Verstegen, people would have heard of, but Mike Boyle's been on the podcast a couple of times before. What was it like working with him?
Oh, he's the best. He's awesome. Not to date myself, but golly, I think it was 2011, maybe. I interned for him and then just kept on staying on, and that's when I really got involved with hockey and USA Hockey and so forth. But it's amazing. If you want coaching experience, I highly recommend you go there. A summer at Mike Boyle's, you will coach more kids in 1, 2, 3 month time than you could in a year or a couple years in the college setting. Just the volume of kids he has coming in every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes. There's just no place like it. And it's really neat because the groups can be mixed. You can have, a footballer with a hockey player, with a baseball player, and they're all on slightly different programs, and you have to learn how to manage that. So it's fantastic. I have nothing but good things to say and a lot of old sweaty t-shirts, pretty much.
And would you say, I always quite like asking this question, but would you say that was the one of the best times in terms of you progressing as a coach because you had such a difference in athletes you were working with, ages, and all the rest of it? Is that the most progress you think you made at that time?
Yeah, for sure. I think right out of college, I went straight to athletes performance, and that was such a great framework for me because at that time, oh, again, not to date myself, it was still called athletes performance, and I hadn't changed over to Exos yet. And I was in Phoenix, so I was kind of at their HQ, and that was, I think, the mecca of a high performance institute. And so I felt like I really understood a framework of what 1% better looked like for high level athletes. And then Mike Boyles was not necessarily the opposite end of the spectrum, but it was taking that framework and then how do you multiply that for different people at different times in different sports and different ages. So I think, yeah, I mean, honestly, I would recommend people do both if they can. They're just super different experiences. But from a coaching standpoint, and getting your feet on the ground, I would definitely recommend Mike Boyles. Yep.
I think from the outside looking in, obviously not spending, I've been to the States, but not spent any time coaching over there, John. And I don't know, I don't think you have either. I think I'm right in saying that. But when we look at those facilities and those opportunities, it looks quite different to here, doesn't it? In terms of what we have available, we have availability and opportunities at clubs, not so much in the private world.
Yeah, I'm jealous to be honest. I think it'd be really good because I remember when I was first starting out and I was still at Leeds Uni in my final year, I'd finished my placement with Southampton. So then I helped out with Leeds Uni S&C like support. And I'm pretty sure compared to facilities, and Leeds Uni is good, by the way, it would be like chalk and cheese. I think it's the one thing we don't appreciate in this country is how different the US collegiate system or university setup is to us. When you see pictures online or videos online and stuff, like it's properly done at university. Whereas I know for a fact, being one of the players at university football clubs, nights out might have been more important sometimes than the football. So I think it's the other way around a little bit at universities in America. So just give us a flavour of in terms of how elite did it feel? Because we obviously, like Ben said, we have, elite football clubs, elite rugby clubs, elite cricket clubs, whatever sport it might be. But from the outside looking in, like Ben said, the university setting in America looks right up there in terms of the standard. Whereas, like I say, in our country, it's a little bit more focused on the drinking culture and being part of the team than the actual sport itself. That's painting a lot of people saying brush, so apologies for that one. But yeah, how is it looking in America in terms of that US system? Because that looks really, really high level.
I think, having worked now both in the professional and the college setting, the college setting here just has more resources than you could imagine. You have a team of teams, just like you would, I guess, in the pro setting, but it's just that much bigger, and you're all housed under one roof, which is so nice. So, for this team alone, you have, your massage therapist, you have me, sports science, as well as S&C. We have 3 athletic trainers on the medical side, or dietitian, so forth. And then obviously, 4 or 5 technical coaches, and that's just one entity. And then that entity is part of a bigger department. And so it just grows this way. So it's just, it is the same setup. I think it's a lot bigger in terms of the amount of athletes you have to serve, because you have 20 plus teams at any given university. And so that's hundreds of athletes. So you have to have a system or structure in place that can provide that level of care for hundreds of athletes. And therefore you have departments of, 5 to 10 people, depending on how big your university is. And I'm honestly sitting in a brand new weight room that we just got for soccer and softball and golf that has 12 racks that Sornax made, 20 yards of turf, a hill right outside us. So, no knock on San Diego, but we definitely didn't have the same setup there. So I just think the amount of resources that are on campus and housed under one roof is quite unique to the US university structure.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Incredible. Jill, you came on to speak about, we're going to speak about locomotor profiling for team sports. So just for anyone listening, what we are going to do, what Jill's going to do, she's going to share some slides that she's got as well. So there are going to be some graphics and visuals that are going to go along with this. Now, you don't necessarily have to go and watch it, but there is going to be stuff that's going to support what she's going to be speaking about as well. So if you want to do that, go over and check out the video version of the podcast. So Jill, do you want to just share what you've got with us, and then we'll dive into the topic just in terms of that initially, just giving us a little bit of introduction into locomotor profiling for team sport athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So locomotor profiling for team sport, what that is basically individualizing conditioning protocols. And then again, for me, it's within a team setting because I work with women's football. A lot of listeners hopefully have heard of mass aerobic speed. I think Dan Baker probably put that on the scene many years ago. I think back in 2012, 2013, when I was at Boston University, I came across the infamous MAS paper by him. And locomotor profiling is utilizing mass aerobic speed as well as your max sprint speed to create a profile. why you would do this is I think it's the most accurate and efficient way to maximize someone's training adaptability. And how you would do this is you would take your mass aerobic speed assessment, so score, and there you would take a max sprint speed and you would minus the two. So if someone has a max sprint speed of 8 meters per second and their MAS is 4 meters per second, you minus the two, and their ASR is 4 meters per second. Are really even numbers. That never happens that way, but just for you listeners, that's how you would basically get your anaerobic speed reserve. From there, you start to make your locomotor profiles. But again, does that make sense from a definition standpoint? We good with that?
Yeah.
So there are many ways you can get your mass aerobic speed. And again, just to define that one more time, that's the lowest speed where your max O2 uptake can occur. So that's the lowest velocity at which your VO2 max is happening. You can do this via a 6-minute time trial. This could be running or on a bike. Or you could do this a running test anywhere between 1K and 2 kilometers. At my previous club, we did a 1.5K because we had 2 pitches, so that was a clean 3 laps. Here, everyone talks in meters, and we have a track. So we did 3 laps around the track, and that was 1,200 meters. So research would suggest both. I have tons of friends in the field that do anywhere between a 2K or a 6-minute time trial. It just depends, I think, on your context. But you need that to be able to get your mass aerobic speed. Then to get your max sprint speed, so the other half of the equation, you could do a 30-meter up to a 50-meter sprint effort. We use Smart Speed here, as well as their GPS units, and I'll make sure those correlate. And if there's any outliers, I'll go back into both parties and ask Bald and Catapult why that might be. But fortunately, we didn't have to go that route. But I would recommend if you have access to both, I would have their unit in as they're going through the lasers. If you only have one, use what you have. In worst case scenario, just get them on the line, have a couple stopwatches, and say go at a given distance. So again, once you get those two things, you take your max sprint speed and you minus it from your MAS, and that provides your anaerobic speed reserve. Your anaerobic speed reserve basically explains how 2 athletes can have a different response to one conditioning session. And I think we've all seen it when we get everybody on the line, especially in team sport. And let's say we're doing a session at over 100%. So a popular one is Eurofit. Eurofit is a 15 on, 15 off at 115, 120% of your MAS. Let's say me and Ben have the same MAS, but Ben is a lot quicker than me. Well, if Ben's max sprint speed is higher than mine, then doing 15 on, 15 on, or 15 on, 15 off is going to be quite easy to him because he's working at a lower sprint percentage. Since I'm slow, I'm pretty close to my ceiling. So Ben's going to be flying and give probably an RPE of like a 6, and I'm going to be dying, and I'm going to give this session an RPE of an 8. And essentially, anaerobic speed reserve is explaining how we are both responding to the same stimulus. Do we have questions? Does that make sense? Do we have questions on that? Keep rolling.
Yeah, I'd say keep going. I think in terms of the application of this, Jordan will probably have some good stuff he can jump in with, because I know at his previous club, this is something that was utilised.
Cool. And Jill, just on that, I think that's a really valid point for a lot of people listening. We all see it in our players, don't we? And that they're very, very different. And I know you're going to go into explaining that in a second. But I think I just wanted to go back to the point you're making on the testing. So I know at my previous club, we did something very similar to 1,500 meter time trial. And just by looking at that alone, you could start to get an idea of how athletes responded to different stimuli and different testing. And then by adding in the testing of sort of, like you say, max speeds and getting those different responses to that, you could get such a good profile of your players. So just to kind of reiterate that point, regardless of what equipment you've got available to you, just being able to perform relatively simple tests, time trials, and measuring distance out. And, measuring wheel isn't that expensive. So if you can measure out 1,500 meters of the pitch and get players to go for it and time it, you've got a fantastic measure of their, mass score, and then you can then build an anaerobic reserve and speed reserve and stuff like that on top. So just to reiterate that point, that was awesome. So Thank you for that. And then in terms of, I know you're going to go into it in a second. How do you break this down for the different players, and how does that look?
Yeah, I think the easiest sell for the athletes and the coaches is you need a assessment of how fit, assessment of how fast you are. And when you combine those two, I get a pretty good understanding of your capability or what training is going to be beneficial for you. So that's a big push for, okay, anaerobic speed reserve is how I'm going to classify you based on how fit and how fast you are. Because some people are really fit and not that fast, and some people are really fast and not that fit. Then you have a handful of players in the middle. And then I think most people can wrap their head around that. They're like, oh yeah, I pretty much know where I land. And then really it's a question to the coaches, okay, well, what position are they and what are the demands that we are going to ask of them? And then it becomes really easy to be like, okay, here's where she is, here's where coach wants her to go. Now I have at least a framework of what I think is going to be optimal to get her there. So the three profiles are endurance, hybrid, and speed. And again, a lot of this is Garrett Sanford's work. He is, in my opinion, the pioneer of locomotor profiling. Lots of research on middle distance runners, as well as cricket players. And I think he's slowly tapping into football. So maybe you guys can get him on here after me. But the three profiles are endurance, hybrid, and speed. Your endurance athletes, as my kids will say, are people who can run forever. I use the analogy of a Tesla. They're very fuel efficient. Your hybrid athletes, semi-fast and fuel efficient. I use the analogy of a truck. A lot of our girls drive trucks around here, so they seem to get that. And then a speed, as they say, fast but won't last, and that is your Ferrari. So your speed athlete is your fast twitch, your great accelerator, can beat anybody probably in a fly-in or point A to point B. Your hybrid, pretty quick, but probably runs out of gas right around maybe 60, 70 seconds. And then your endurance box to boxes or your wide players, and you know they can go all day. But if I get them on the line, they're not necessarily going to win a 30-meter race. So those are kind of your big three classifications. When you do the actual math itself, so like I said, your MAS, or sorry, your max spin speed minus your MAS, the three classifications, if you're 2 and above, you're a speed, you're Ferrari. If you're 1.8 and 1.9, you're a hybrid. And if you're 1.7 and below, you're an endurance. So already you have your classifications for you. So those who are actually watching this is just an honest table of my athletes. Obviously, I took their names out, but you can see we have our test. We have our MAS from our 1,200-meter run. We have our max spin speed from our 30-meter effort. Again, you minus those two to get your ASR. And then you divide those two to get your profile, and that ratio is one of those three classifications. 2 and above is speed, 1.8 to 1.9 is hybrid, and 1.7 is endurance. So what that really means is, again, your endurance profiles, what we're good at is long continuous efforts, meaning efforts of 60 seconds and above. So if I give them 2 or 3 minutes to hold a certain pace, that's going to be quite easy for them. What they are not good at are things like repeat spinability and max spin speed. Again, you can decide as a practitioner which one you want to utilize depending on the time of year. It's just providing you a framework of, I know these guys are good at holding a pace, and I know they're not that great at max velocity. Your hybrids are either the toughest to manage or the funnest to manage. I guess it's up to you, but they're pretty good at each. This is where I think asking the coaches what position they play and really getting to know the athlete can help you out with your hybrids. They are good at short and long critical speed. Critical speed is just work at aerobic threshold. They're kind of fast, but they're not the fastest. So they kind of need a little bit of a split week. So getting to what we do here, but I kind of give them 1 and 1. So if we do 2 days a week of locomotor exposures, I'll give them one RSA day, one repeat sprintability day, and one short critical speed day. So they kind of get a dose of each throughout the course of the week. And then your speed profiles, again, these are your Ferraris, these are your fast twitch kids. They are very quick. They're good at repeat spin ability. They can probably keep a pace for 30 seconds or under, so you can do some short intervals with them. What they are not good at is long continuous efforts. So again, if I told them to try and hold pace for 2 or 3 minutes, they could do it, but the cost of doing business for them at that pace for that time period is going to be great. So then you just ask yourself as a practitioner, is that the best way to get the most out of that athlete? And my answer would be no. And then repeat sprint ability just depends on your rest intervals for that. Again, I think it's something they can work on. They're good at it, but with short rest, they're not going to be able to hit the high velocities you want them to hit. Where maybe your hybrids can do that because they're just not as quick.
Joe, you showed the split there of the different profiles across your squad that you're currently working with. Is that quite a typical split, would you say, in terms of a couple of sort of hybrid endurance based players and then majority sort of hybrid and then hybrid into speed? Is that, or does that depend on maybe the style of play, or even, I suppose, at professional level, the recruitment strategy as well? Does that all come into play with that?
Yeah, I definitely think training age, biological age, and style of play are all factors that should seriously be considered. I think at my previous club, we didn't have that many endurance athletes. It was probably closer to a 50-50 mix of hybrid and speed. And then again, I think this is just the classification. They fall, and then the follow-up conversation I think needs to be had with the athlete and with the coach. Okay, what would you give this session? If I give you a Euro 15-15, what would you give that? And if they give that, a high RPE, that's just something to take into consideration. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of a greater cost than their classification would have let on. Or, oh, hey, they really responded to an RSA, 5-second effort on the 30-second mark. So I think you're definitely going to get a spread no matter what team you work with at any level. And then it's just trying to really narrow it down. Okay, even if they are a hybrid, and you can see in my little table here, I have hybrid/speed. There's a question mark, and that question mark just means, again, I'm just going to go talk to the coach and say, okay, well, what position is she? A wide player? What do we need her to do? Okay, she's a midfielder. What do we need her to do? Then again, that becomes an easy conversation with the player as well. Hey, even though this is where you fell, these are the demands that are going to be expected of you. So this is why I'm going to put you in this group for this conditioning today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They don't always agree with it, but at least you can back up what you're saying.
That's true.
So again, you have your three profiles. How you get that is you divide your max sprint speed from your mass aerobic speed, and you get your locomotor profile. This is, for those of you who are watching, this is a really nice graphic I just got from Martin Bouquet on Hit Science. Just goes through each profile, your speed, your hybrid, your endurance. Again, they're pretty much what they sound like. Your speed profiles are your ATP, CP athletes, very fast twitch. They are fast off the line. They just run out of gas quickly. Your hybrid is probably your box-to-box athletes, so pretty quick. They can get there, but they will eventually run out of gas probably between 60 and 70 minutes. And then your endurance athletes, those are the ones that you can rely on. They can just go all day. They never seem to get tired in a fitness session. But when you're doing high velocity efforts or repeat sprints, they are not necessarily the first person. So again, those are your three classifications, and then you just use that to decide, okay, how can I best suit this player? So for us, what it looks like in the off season, I send everybody home with a packet, and they'll have 4 days a week of what I call locomotor running. If you're a speed athlete, I give you critical speed at 75%. Again, critical speed is aerobic threshold. So each classification is going to go at 75% aerobic threshold in the off season, but the time at which they hold that pace is going to be different. So again, your speed athletes can't hold that pace for that long, so their interval is going to be 45 seconds on, 15 off, but they're going to have the most reps because their interval of work is so short. So they'll go 45 seconds on, 15 seconds off, and they have 10 reps. Your hybrid athletes who are pretty decent at holding pace are going to go 2 minutes on, 30 seconds off, and they're going to go 8 reps. And then your endurance athletes are going to go 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, and they're probably going to go 6 reps. So you go up in duration of work interval, you go down in overall volume, and the intensity can stay the same for everybody. That's one way to slice it. That's just one way to slice it. Then in season, I would say it looks completely different. When we're on the pitch, I usually do this match day +2. They come out of film. I have a series of activation drills that everybody does, and then I break them into 3 groups, and each group is doing something different. I have my endurance group. I have a pacer. I give them my watch. I say, hey, can you give me 2 by 3 minutes at this pace? They're running around the pitch, keeping that. I have my hybrids are doing I call it an anaerobic speed reserve shuttle, but it's basically just a variation of a stride jog walk between the box to box. And then my speed is doing repeat sprints. They're doing 5-second efforts, usually around 30 meters, kind of depends on who. And they're doing that every 30 to 35 seconds. So just 2 different. Again, that was a lot, especially if you're not following along visually. But to recap, in the off season, let's say everybody is doing 75% of critical speed. For your speed athletes, that will be 45 seconds on, 15 off, and they have 10 of them. For your hybrid athletes, you're going to increase the duration of that interval. So 2 minutes on, 30 seconds off. And for your endurance athletes, again, they're good at holding pace. So I'm going to go with 3-to-1. So intensity stayed the same. Work durations increase depending on your fuel economy, and volume would decrease depending on your fuel economy. Then in season, I have 3 different groups running around the pitch doing 3 different completely modalities at the same time. But because I can manipulate the volume, it all takes about 5 to 6 minutes. So that's an easy sell for coach. Hey, everyone's going to go through activation drills. That takes 6 minutes. I need 6 minutes of aerobic running. And then, within 15 minutes, we can start training.
And would that always be the same, Jill, in terms of you said about targeting match day +2? So would that remain similar in terms of that target? Would it be repeated more often, or are you literally just having that one day?
It kind of depends. I think it kind of depends on how the week goes and mentally what we're able to prepare. I would love a match day +2 and then a match day -1. I think that's where you could do more of your shorter sprint efforts. So your endurance athletes, their fuel is long duration intervals. So I want to feed that system. In the same breath, we know that they're not that great at their max sprint speed. So I also feel it's my due diligence to give them an exposure to that. So can I maybe get, a couple fly-ins match day -1? So in an ideal scenario, I would probably have one day that is critical speed or aerobic efforts or locomotor profile day, whatever you want to call it, early in the week to kind of reset everybody and give them the fuel that they're efficient in. And then match day -1, see if I can give them a sprint exposure, high intensity exposure, but obviously keep the reps short as you're getting closer to time. And then that obviously kind of depends on who's playing and what they've been exposed to throughout the course of the week, and a handful of other variables you should look at. But I would say in an ideal scenario, it would be twice a week.
Yeah, that's cool.
Jordan, you want to tap into anything that worked or didn't work for you?
No, I was just going to say, so the 45-15 is very familiar for me. It was a run we used a lot at Bournemouth, and manipulated a lot around that in off season, in season as well, and things like that. So yeah, really interesting seeing how you manipulate that. Well, I think the question I've got loads of questions actually, but the first one I wanted to ask is like, how long? I know you said you worked with a coach previously, but how long has it taken you to integrate this into the system with coaches? How quick was that buy-in? Because I think the way you break it down is amazing in terms of the three different types of athlete player, how you can then break that down into positions and then strengths and weaknesses per player for their positions. Then you say to the coach, like you said, 5, 6 minutes of running after activation, and you've got three different groups going anytime. Were the coaches like, yeah, cool, we trust you, crack on, or did it need a little bit of persuasion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always needs education and persuasion and massaging and collaborating. And it's probably a month in each of those before you finally get what you want. But yeah, again, I think, you always ask the coach first, okay, what are the physical goals for or demands of these positions or of these players? Okay, when do you need that by, sort of? And then it's okay, if I'm going to make the most educated decision and we want to individualize as much as possible, then this is the best way I know how. And again, I think I've yet to have a coach or an athlete say that you have to take into account fitness and speed. It has to be how fast you are and how fit you are. I've yet to meet a coach or an athlete that just wants to do one. And so I think it's an easy sell to be like, I need to take into consideration both of these. And then I think you just ask, depending on the practice plan that day or that week or whatever phase you're in training, you're not asking for that many minutes or that many moments. You're saying, okay, can I go twice a week for a total of, anywhere from 6 to 12 minutes? Or, okay, can we microdose it throughout the course of the week? Can I get an exposure of 5 minutes every day? Okay, you're only going to give me one day. Well, then let's all understand how long it's going to take for this adaptation to happen. I think it's just, I mean, it's constant. It's definitely constant. So how long did it take? Oh, golly, I don't know. As long as it took to happen, I guess. But I think I would say this. What was neat is even when I was at the Wave that we provided this presentation to the coaching staff, they at least agreed to it. We then provided the same presentation to the players. They at least understood why we were doing it. And then we were able to do, 1.5K probably 3 times a year. And we busted out a speed a little bit more frequently than that, just because it's fun to run through the lasers and provide some competition. So actually, it wasn't that hard. We got pretty decent buy-in, and then I would say here it was a little more like, what, you want us to run laps and do what? It took a little bit, but I think once people started to feel better of like, oh yeah, I feel a lot better when I do this, and if she were to do what I'm doing, she would gas out. It gained a little bit of traction. So I think, yeah, it really just depends on, I guess, your pitch to your coaching staff and your players, but uh, um, it's possible. I would say that much.
It shows the buy-in of sorry, the power of buy-in, doesn't it? Because by breaking it down into language, we always say this, breaking it down to language that coaches and players understand. I think naturally you'll create competition within that squad, won't you? Because if you're saying, right, you're a Ferrari, you're a truck, you're a Tesla, you need to work on these things, and players go, okay, I know now which one I'm in, and maybe you've then got a Tesla who wants to try and beat a truck in a sprint, and it creates that little bit of competition and stuff like that. And like you say, running through the speed gates is always fun. So you create that. Can you beat top speed this week? If you've got GPS on as well, like I find can you get above 95%? Who's going to get 100% plus one? Who's going to get 102, 103%? Who can do that? Can you offer a little reward? And then that little buy-in must have been really, really cool from the players. They must have probably got onto that quite quick because of that language you used.
I think so. But yeah, to your point, I think even again when I make this presentation to players, I put the three cars on the screen, and before I even say anything, I just say, "Hey, I'm talking about conditioning today." Most people are like, "Oh, I think I'm that," or "Oh, okay, I'm definitely that," or "Oh, you're over here." Like they already know before I even say anything, and so it's neat to be and at both levels. I found that at the pro level and this level. So I think it's more, and I try and tell them it's more just validating probably what you already know and feel. Man, I am not a box to box runner. Like I cannot play, wide back or wide forward, whatever it is. Like that word, I just can't do that. But man, you put me on the line and you tell me to go. Oh yeah, I got you. whether it's a fly-in or from a static start. So I think most players already know. So I try and pitch it to them and coaches. It's just trying to meet you where you're at, expose or validate what you're good at, expose what you're not good at. And then it's really a matter of throughout the course of the week, throughout the course of the month, throughout the course of the season, throughout the course of the year, how can we highlight that? Or are we highlighting that? Because if we're just taking your fitness or we're just taking your speed into account, we're not highlighting it. So we need to take time to classify into each and then assess and reassess and get feedback. And they might be sick of doing grids or box to boxes or shuttles, but okay, then that's great. Then as a practitioner, what else can I give them? So um, yeah, I think I've had buy-in from both teams at both levels, but nomenclature and language is absolutely paramount.
Awesome.
This is for those of you who are watching. I think this is another great example that again I just took from Martin Bouquet. This is a fixed box-to-box visual. Obviously, again, if you use MAS or now, hopefully, you will use anaerobic speed reserve. Let's say the three of us are doing a box-to-box workout, say that in quotes, and we're going at 5% of our anaerobic speed reserve. That might be 4.2 meters per second for me. Maybe, oh yeah, I said Ben was quick. Ben's 4.5, and maybe Jordan, you're the fastest of the bunch. You're 4.8. So yeah, there you go. So if we multiply that by 15 seconds, each one of us is going to run at a different distance, even though the time is set. So for practitioners, it's actually quite easy. I can set up 3 cones, 4 cones, however many people are in the session, and then I'm able to meet each person at the speed zone to make sure that no one person is tapping into their ceiling more than the other. So in summary, the 2 things you need to do to be able to create a locomotor profile is a mass aerobic speed assessment. Again, you can do that with anything between a 1K or a 2K or a 6-minute time trial. You need a max sprint speed assessment that, again, can be a 30-meter or a 50-meter. How you make those profiles is sprint speed by your MAS. Then I would chat with your coaches and figure out how you can implement that within a team session. Again, like I said, that works for us match day +2 and potentially match day -1. I do it pre. It just depends on how your sessions are run. And then after you can integrate it in your team sessions, I would challenge the listeners to then look at each individual and can I provide homework or can I provide top-ups that are actually beneficial for that player to get them where just give them a standard box to box or this, that, and the other. Can I give them a little bit more granular detail and what they need? And then, as always with anything, try and reassess as the calendar year allows you to.
I was just about to ask on that in terms of the reassessment, Jill, because currently, as we record this, we're sort of pre-busy Christmas period in the UK. So just give us a little insight and for listeners, obviously we've got listeners that'll be at different stages of the season when they listen to this as well. But what would be some of your windows, I suppose, of opportunity where you would reassess, like the targets?
Yeah, let's see. We start in August. I get the gals in July, so I test the beginning of July and then I reassess usually when we have a little bit of a low week in August. Then I won't reassess again until postseason. And then I try and go 3 or 4 times a year. So basically 1 in the summer, 1 in fall to winter, and 1 in spring. So I guess I would say that because everyone's on a different calendar. For your max sprint speed assessments, I mean, the more you can do it, the better. And that just doesn't take that long. And again, if you're tracking that from a GPS standpoint, last time to sprint exposure, that should be honestly really easy to do within a season. If you're in your off season, you still want to be ramping up. So maybe you're not testing that as much in the off season, but I would think you would be able to get that at least 5 or 6 times throughout the course of the year. So I don't know, maybe three or four for MAS once a season, spring, fall, and winter, and then maybe 4 to 5 times for your sprint speeds, or as many times as honestly you can. I think running fast is good for you, so I would do it as many times as you can. I tell my athletes that you live longer if you can run fast. So
Brilliant.
we sprint as many times as we possibly can.
Jordan, how have you that applied just in terms of the frequency of the reassessment?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was just going to say the reassessment is often the hardest bit, isn't it, in terms of getting the full profile. But you hit the nail on the head there. With we know sprint exposure is important. Try to hit 90%, ideally 95% of sprint speeds regularly, once a week, ideally twice a week if you can. If it's a nicer game week, that'll allow you to do that. So there you go. That's one of those ticked off straight away, isn't it? If you can do that once a week, make it competitive, make it fun, make it races. Bosh, thank you very much. That's that one tick. It's always the Maz one that's the hardest one, isn't it? In terms of getting that back and trying to convince coaches we want to take time to do a Maz test away from a busy period, busy schedule. And I think this is a big picture and a bigger, wider discussion, which we've been having a lot on the podcast recently, Jill, in terms of in this country, certainly fixture congestion. It just seems to be more games. And I actually added it up the other day. I think Liverpool in December, first team, I'm going to be Liverpool unbiased, obviously. They've got 9 games in the month of December. I think off the top of my head, that's right. I think it's one every 3 days. So if you're a first team environment, you're literally playing, recover, bit of tactical, play, recover, bit of tactical. And that's where it becomes crazy. So I think Ben hit the nail on the head earlier with that question of windows of opportunity. We had Portsmouth staff on the podcast, and they spoke about it really well in terms of international breaks for players who aren't called up is a great time to try and get that done. Difficult now when in the academy settings, in younger environments, that's typically a little bit easier because their weeks aren't quite as hard. Typically, they're Saturday to Saturday weeks or Sunday to Sunday weeks, depending on ages and years and things like that. You might have a midweek fixture in there, but that's where you can start to test it a little bit more. But then you argue about which age. But I think in terms of your presentation there, Joe, I just wanted to reiterate that I think it's really important that how this is the next stage. We had Martin Bouchard obviously on the podcast, and I think it was really important in how we were talking about the development of sports science and how it's changed, because the classic age-old adage of they're not fit enough. And we've all had that as practitioners, and the coaches turn around and they've looked at the sports scientists and they've gone, they're not fit enough. What have you been doing with them? They're not fit enough. And they might be in this context looking at a speedster. They might be looking at a Ferrari. This is the context now that we as practitioners, sports scientists, whatever you call us, can go backward to the coaches and go, yeah, well, you've been playing them for 90 minutes in a position that isn't suited to them as an individual. So I think this is what's really important and hopefully empowering for potential practitioners who haven't implemented some of this stuff before, to allow them to take the sports science at their club, their environment, whatever it is, to the next level. So yeah, awesome. But yeah, question I will finish with, we'll get to a question, is where do you see it going next? I always like to ask this one in terms of this is awesome, and it gives proper player profile, like I just said there. What's the next step for you?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's just fine tuning. I provided some general methods that I've had, a little bit of success with. We also do the yo-yo beep test as another. That's just one my coach is familiar with, and he likes that. So that's also another sneaky kind of reassess we can use. We also utilize an an MAS test for return to play. So I think that's also a potentially another window or another tick you could use to assess progress. And then lastly, I would say, because like you said, sports science is such a heavy role and you have GPS units, if I am tracking max spin speed and that is going up, and then I'm looking at the match as my assessment and their high speed running is going up and they're playing more minutes, I could probably direction that they're going in. Maybe obviously not an appropriate time to do a full MAS test, but I think you might be able to pull enough of the variables to be like, okay, well, he is getting faster, she is getting faster, and she is able to make runs in the 80th minute that we haven't seen before. So we're probably going in the right direction. So where do I see it going next? Yeah, I think it's just fine tuning. I don't think I have all the uh, modalities and methods to meet everyone where they're at all the time. So my goal is to probably have coffee with Gareth Sanford and and pick his brain. That would be my next step. Have a one-on-one with him. Uh, but I think I am proud and confident that at least the athletes I work with now know where they are at, they know what they're good at, and they know what they need to work on. And I think that would be probably my biggest goal or takeaway for anyone that is listening is I would just utilize this framework to validate what the athletes are feeling and then educate the coaching staff what they need the most of. And I think Jordan, you were saying, that speed athlete, we have a girl like that on our team, and she's the fastest one on the team, and she can break 20 miles per hour pretty consistently, and no one's really even close to that. And so I just say, of course, she's going to run out of gas because you're asking her to make this sprint effort. So it just depends on what you want her to be able to do. Do you want her to be able to beat that back line or dive into that space, or do you want her to last for 60 plus minutes? Because both is at the current moment impossible. So just tell me which end of the spectrum you want me to work on, and then we can go from there. So it's really just rewording the obvious, and then getting the coaches to understand, like, you're not always gonna you don't have, you know you don't have beasts and robust athletes all the time. You can't always have the Clydesdale. It's kind of got to be one or the other. Um, you gotta zero in on what skill you want to work on in that moment, and then try and compound and work over time. But next steps would be fine tuning and have a one-on-one with Gareth.
I love the fact that Jordan brought that up about around context, because I think that gives a really nice applied sort of layer to what you're talking about here, Jill. And also it ties in with a topic we speak about loads on recent podcasts, is in terms of where the game is going as well. Fixtures, squad sizes. We just spoke there about where players will then fit into a squad. Okay, this player might not be able to play every game, every minute of every game, but they could be the match winners, and we'll keep them as the match winners, and we'll use them
Right.
where they need to be used. And I think this is where this fits really nicely, isn't it? You start to exactly what it is. You're starting to profile that player and see where they fit within that squad, which is really good. And I think you've done a great breakdown there for us on obviously the work you do and how this could be applied across different squads as well. So I think it was great just to give the listeners and anyone that's watched it just that indication of how this can be applied.
Yeah, and we also use RPE, and I don't know, Jordan, if you did as well, but that's a reliable metric of the demands of a session for an athlete. And I think if you know their makeup and you have a hard session, and for whatever reason they uh, or you have an easy session and they deem it as hard, it just sparks conversation of, okay, well, why is that? Or, is there something in their wellness or their sleep score that we missed? Or again, I think it's just providing context to a deeper layer. If you know the cost of doing business is going to be higher for a certain athlete for a certain practice, and we all know that, then it's just a risk assessment. Okay, are we willing to do that? Yes or no? But if everybody's on the same page of that, then it just becomes a little bit easier to manage.
Brilliant, Jill. Well, let's just wrap things up there. I think the content there has been superb. So thank you very much for sharing that. I know you've put it on screen now. I was just about to ask that. In terms of if people want to reach out, if they've got questions, anyone watching on the video will be able to see it there. But do you want to give the sort of tags or wherever you want to send people?
Yeah, Instagram is probably the best. I'm Jill _ the machine _ Zeller. That was given to me by a previous strength coach in the middle of Squatober a couple years ago. And or email my last name, Zeller, Zeller, J as in Jill, M as in Mary, and the number 1 at gmail.com. So I would say, honestly, I'm a lot faster at my email, so just bear with me if it takes me a day to reply back.
Brilliant. Jill, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you guys so much. That was great.
Awesome.
Jordan, that was nice to focus in on a single topic, wasn't it? But also for anyone that didn't watch the episodes, there was great detail that Jill gave, wasn't there, on the visuals and the slides as well?
Yeah, really, really good. So again, encourage people if you were listening, but you're thinking actually that hang on, I want to watch that back. There seems like some really good detail in there, which there definitely was. Hop over on the YouTube channel and watch it on there because obviously you'll have the joy of pausing it as well and probably seeing some weird faces from us on a freeze frame. So but no, really, really detailed like explanation of how you can properly, get into the nuts and bolts of running a proper sports science program. And I think that's what I was trying to really get at is that this is taking it to the next level in terms of and I know some teams do this already, but if you're in an environment like I've been in when it's almost a bit of a one-man band and you're just trying to you've got some time with the players, so you're trying to maximize that within the gym or on the pitch, whatever you are, it might be slightly harder to implement. But like I was trying to get to at the podcast, a measuring wheel is dead cheap. You just need to measure out a distance. If it's a 1200 meter, 1500 meter, 1600 meter, whatever you want to go for. Time trial, easy to do. Sprint speeds you can get done, even if it's just with the stopwatch. A lot of clubs have timing systems, Brower or the Witty ones. Stopwatch is fine. Like it's not the best in the world. I know it's not the most reliable, but as you can get some sort of measure, you can start to get into this sort of detail now, and it's going to help us in the long run put profile players in really, really important ways. And I think it will start to really help implement training methods. It will then start to have a tactical, implications as well in terms of how you play with certain players in certain times. And it might even give explanations as to why some players are fantastic at coming off the bench for the last half an hour and having real impacts in games, but they might not be great. They do really well in the first half and then they look rubbish and they get taken off in the 45 because they're one of the speedsters, for example. So yeah, just lots of detail in there to really get stuck in if you want to.
I love that side of it, just in terms of that context and how it caters for the different type of player. Because we can all think of like a very, very technical player that physically they're going to be more of like the hybrid type of player, aren't they? But and everyone will have an idea of a player they probably work with that fit into the different profiles, I'm sure. But I think that's where the power is, isn't it? And like I mentioned in the episode, we've talked about the future of the game, the more fixtures, probably bigger squad sizes, how those individual players fit into that then becomes even more apparent, doesn't it? And it just gives a bit more detail on when we should utilize certain players. So I think this is quite a well-timed episode in a way because we've spoke about that topic a lot and this has just added another layer to it. And the other thing that I thought Jill spoke about really well is how she initially approached the conversation in terms of give me a small amount of time. I'm not asking for a full session. I'm asking for once a week, just a few minutes just to put players through what I feel is needed. And I think that's another important point, isn't it? If you can start with that and give context to the coaches, you're much more likely to get that than to start asking for a lot straight off the offset. And I know she said that like that relationship's been developed over a number of years, but regardless of whether it is something like this or something else, you've got to start small and then build that trust and that relationship, and then you can start add more into it. So I thought that was what was really good as well. But yeah, the context side of it, in terms of you mentioned about players not being fit enough and things like that, this gives the level of detail and context to that, doesn't it? Which I thought was great.
Yeah, and I think as well, it also, if you were to maybe not know it to Jill's level of understanding and other practitioners as well out there that she was referencing, but if you can start to get a good understanding of this, we know there's different models to football, tactical periodization, a lot of small-sided games, heavy, very little focused running and more with the ball in match situations and stuff like that. But this is something which, if you can at least have an understanding of that, you might be working with coaches, managers in a club who prefer not to do sort of isolated running and things like that. Fine. But I think you mentioned it, didn't even broach subjects from a rehab point of view. If you're bringing a player back to be fit to play, having this stuff is golden, because you can go, actually, their sprint speeds are up there. Oh, look, their MAS scores are now up there. And actually, we know from matches before they got injured, they were hitting these sorts of speeds and all these sorts of distances and things like that. and pre-season levels of these tests and anaerobic speed, etc., we can now drop them back in because we actually know fitness-wise they're back up. Because again, we know the coaches will be quick to look at us if they go, they're not up to pace, they're not up to pace now, they're not fit enough. It will be thrown your way pretty quickly. So from a rehab, even just from a rehab point of view, I think it's golden as well. So yeah, the context, as always, context is key. But like I said, it provides us as practitioners with good sound evidence and good rationalization of ways of going. These are the different players we've got on our squad, and how we can then have those conversations with coaches, because coaches love that. If you can say, well, actually, these players got, they're very fast, high impact players that they can come on and just, will be straight away high speeds, bring that to you as a coach and the team. Coaches can visualize that. They know who they are. They're high impact players, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a really good way to buy in, to then go into the conversation. Well, actually, we've also got our endurance players. We've got our box to boxes, and that's where you can kind of get in and stuff like that. So, yeah, another really, really good episode.
And just for anyone wondering, so Gareth Sanford has been on the podcast before, episode 180. So go and listen to that. It was on with Damien Harper. So you can go and check out that episode. I know Jill references work. So yeah, he covered, we basically spoke about how we're preparing them for the demands of today or tomorrow in that episode. So I'd recommend you, it's one of the most popular ones we've recorded as well. So go and check that episode out as well. Just final thing from me, go and check out our sponsors. That is Rezzil, Hydro, and the Good Prep. And yeah, Jordan, thank you again for your time, mate.
I loved it. Really good episode again.